Before the name Jerusalem was ever spoken, before kings raised their banners and prophets lifted their voices, there stood a city bathed in calm, Salem, the city of peace. It lay between valleys of war and hills of wandering tribes, yet its heart was untouched by corruption. While kingdoms around it bowed to idols of gold and carved stones, Salem bowed only to the Most High God, unseen but ever near. And ruling this city was a man unlike any other, Melchizedek. A name that means King of Righteousness, a title not born of blood, but of holiness. No one knew where he came from, no genealogy, no father's name, no mother's lineage. He appeared as if summoned by heaven itself, a man clothed in wisdom, walking among mortals yet carrying the scent of eternity. The people feared him not because of his power, but because of his purity. He ruled not by sword or decree, but by truth, and in his presence, deceit could not stand. If you want to uncover what truly happened when Abraham met Melchizedek, and how that single encounter unlocked the mystery of an eternal priesthood, subscribe to my channel, stay with the story, and watch how light once more entered a world drowning in darkness. Melchizedek's reign was not of conquest, but of order. He built no armies. He conquered no neighbors. Yet even the fiercest warlords would not dare cross the borders of Salem, for they whispered that the hand of the Almighty covered that land. In the quiet mornings, the king would rise before dawn, ascending the hill above the city. There, upon an altar of uncut stone, he would offer bread and wine, a symbol of life and peace, to the God Most High El Elyon. The smoke would rise gently into the dawn, a sign of covenant between heaven and earth. In those days, the world was a storm. Tribes fought for survival. Men built idols of wood and bone, calling them gods. Blood was spilled in the names of shadows, and the earth groaned beneath the weight of mankind's violence. Yet Salem stood like a single flame in the darkness, small but unextinguished. How did such light exist in an age so dim? How could one man hold the knowledge of the Creator before prophets had spoken or scriptures had been written? That is the first mystery of Melchizedek. Some said he was a priest sent from the heavens, a messenger guarding the ancient knowledge of creation. Others believed he was a remnant of an older world, one that walked with God before the floodwaters erased all memory. And a few dared to whisper something even greater, that he was not merely a man, but a manifestation of the divine. The Word made visible before time would reveal his name. But Melchizedek himself never spoke of such things. He lived humbly, teaching his people to walk in justice, to care for the stranger, to feed the hungry, and to give thanks to the one who created all things. He wore no crown of gold, only a linen band around his brow. He walked among shepherds and merchants, greeting each by name. Yet even the wind seemed to hush when he prayed. To understand Melchizedek, you must understand his world. It was a time when kings were worshipped as gods, and power was the measure of divinity. But Salem's king was different. His throne was built on righteousness, his law on mercy. And while the rest of the earth burned with ambition, he built peace. But peace is a fragile thing. Even the holiest of lands cannot stay hidden forever. To the east, in the shadow of the great rivers, for mighty kings began to rise. Their armies devoured cities, enslaved tribes, and claimed dominion over everything their chariots could reach. Their names carried terror, their hunger no end. And while they marched westward, Salem stood in their path, silent as stone. Melchizedek watched from his high place. He saw the smoke of war in the distance and the cries of the conquered carried by the wind. Yet he did not fear, for he knew peace cannot be guarded by swords, only by the hand of God. But this oncoming storm would bring with it a meeting that would change history forever. A man was journeying across the deserts, a man chosen by the same God whom Melchizedek served. His name was Abram, a traveler led by divine promise, destined to become the father of nations. Two men both chosen, both righteous, were on paths that would soon collide. One, the king of a holy city whose priesthood seemed eternal. The other, a wanderer called out of idolatry to build a covenant that would bless the world. Their meeting was not a coincidence, it was divine design. But before their paths would cross, the world would be shaken. Empires would rise against empires, brothers would turn against brothers, and blood would flow like rivers. The heavens would watch as men waged war for what they could never truly own. And somewhere beyond it all, Melchizedek would stand, calm as a flame untouched by the wind, knowing that the moment had come, the moment when the God of heaven would make himself known not through lightning or plague, but through blessing. So who was Melchizedek, really? Was he a man born of dust, lifted by faith to divine wisdom? Or was he the shadow of something eternal, a priesthood not made by human hands, but by the breath of God himself? His story holds secrets the world still struggles to unravel. He appears once in the ancient record, a brief light in the darkness of history, and then vanishes, leaving behind only a question that echoes across ages. Who is the priest of the Most High God? For centuries, scholars, kings, and prophets have searched for the answer. And though the scrolls are silent, the truth still speaks. Hidden in the bread and the wine, in the blessing and the promise. Because this is not just history, this is revelation. The dawn rose gently over the hills of Salem. The air was cool, and the mists hung low, wrapping the city like a white veil. Birds sang over the olive groves, and the faint scent of incense drifted from the high altar where Melchizedek stood, facing east, hands lifted toward the rising sun. This was how every day began in Salem, not with the sound of merchants or the cry of children, but with worship. The city was alive, not with noise, but with peace. Melchizedek's people had learned to live differently from the tribes around them. While other cities were ruled by fear, Salem was guided by reverence. Its laws were simple yet sacred. Honor God. Keep peace with all men. Do not cheat the poor. Speak no false witness. Let justice rule your gates. And so Salem became a haven. Travelers passing through would often stop and weep, saying they felt something they had never known. A stillness, a lightness of soul. For here, in this quiet valley, the presence of the Most High seemed to dwell. Melchizedek walked among his people not as a distant king, but as a shepherd among his flock. He visited the vineyards, blessed the harvests, and taught the elders wisdom beneath the shade of ancient trees. He was not young, his face bore the lines of years, but his eyes shone like firelight, filled with compassion and strength. Children would run to him, clutching their small gifts of fruit and bread, and he would smile, laying his hand gently upon their heads. When he prayed, even the wind would quiet. When he spoke, hearts would turn. Salem prospered, but not in gold or treasure. Its riches were its people, content, united, grateful. And Melchizedek's fame spread beyond the hills. Caravans from the east spoke of the King of Light, the priest of the invisible God. Men from distant lands would come seeking answers. Who is this God you serve, who blesses your fields and silences your enemies? And Melchizedek would answer with calm authority. He is El Elyon, the Most High, creator of heaven and earth. He needs no image, no altar of blood. His temple is the heart that walks in righteousness. The words carried like a river through the desert winds. Some mocked, some believed, but all remembered. For years, Salem lived untouched by war. Its gates never closed. Its walls were not built for defense, but for beauty, carved with scenes of peace, harvest, and prayer. At the heart of the city stood the temple of bread and wine, where offerings of gratitude were made daily. It was not a place of sacrifice or slaughter, but of thanksgiving. And yet, even in peace, Melchizedek felt the tremors of something distant, a shift in the balance of nations. He would often climb the highest tower of Salem at night, looking eastward toward the horizon, watching the faint glow of fires far away. Armies were stirring. Kings were forming alliances. The earth itself seemed restless. He knew war was coming. The people of Salem did not understand. They had lived under divine favor for so long that the thought of battle felt like a dream. But Melchizedek understood the ways of heaven. He knew that peace is not eternal on earth. It must be guarded, tested, and sometimes reborn through conflict. And so, he prepared not by forging weapons but by strengthening faith. He gathered the elders and said, "The winds of war will soon blow across this land, but fear not, for the arm of flesh may fail, yet the hand of God never falters." The people bowed, and the king-priest began to lead them in prayer. Meanwhile, far beyond the mountains of the east, a coalition of kings was gathering. They came from Elam, Shinar, and the great cities by the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, lands of old power and ambition. Their armies stretched across the plains like shadows devouring the sun. Their banners bore symbols of serpents and suns, their voices chanting to gods of fire and stone. They had conquered kingdoms, enslaved nations, and now their eyes turned west, toward the lands of Canaan. For there were riches to plunder, slaves to take, and cities to claim. The first to fall were the cities of the Jordan Valley, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim. Their kings fled, their fields burned. And among those taken captive was a man named Lot, nephew of Abram the Wanderer, the man of promise. Word reached Melchizedek quickly. Messengers came running through the night, bearing news of war and devastation. Salem trembled, but Melchizedek did not fear. He stood at the gates, eyes fixed upon the dark horizon, and whispered, "The time has come." He knew what the others did not, that this war was not merely between kings, but between orders, the kingdoms of men and the kingdom of God. And he knew that one man, guided by faith, would soon rise to meet this storm. That man was Abram. Somewhere beyond the valley, the shepherd warrior was gathering his men. Not soldiers, but servants, loyal and trained in secret. 318 in all. A small number compared to the multitudes of the eastern kings. But they marched under a different banner, one unseen yet mighty. Melchizedek prayed for him. He prayed not for victory, but for revelation. That through this battle, the Most High would reveal his covenant and his priesthood to the world. The people of Salem watched their king kneel upon the stone altar as the night deepened. He placed bread and wine before the flame, lifting them as offerings of peace in a world descending into chaos. His prayer rose with the smoke, carrying words no ear but heavens could understand. And the Lord heard him. That night, a wind swept across the valley, strong, warm, alive. It stirred the trees, rippled the torches, and filled the hearts of the people with courage. They did not know what would happen next, but they knew this. Their king was not just a ruler. He was a bridge between heaven and earth. In the distance, the fires of war grew brighter. But in Salem, the city of peace, the altar still burned, not with fear, but with faith. And somewhere, beyond the hills, destiny was marching toward its meeting point. A meeting between two men, one bearing the blessing of heaven, the other bearing the promise of nations. Neither knew it yet, but the world would never be the same after they met. The earth trembled beneath the march of armies. From the lands beyond the rivers, Elam, Shinar, Elasa, and Goim, 4 kings rose with fire in their eyes and conquest in their hearts. They were ancient powers, seasoned by countless wars, men who believed their gods had made them unstoppable. Their leader, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, was a tyrant feared across the east. His soldiers bore armor black as obsidian and blades forged in sacred flame. Wherever his banner flew, cities crumbled and nations bowed. But this time, his hunger had turned toward the west, toward the fertile plains of Canaan. For 12 years, the cities of the Jordan Valley had paid him tribute. But in the 13th year, they rebelled. And Chedorlaomer did not forgive rebellion. He gathered his allies, 3 kings whose names echoed like thunder: Amraphel of Shinar, Arioch of Elasa, and Tidal, ruler of the nations. Together, they swept across the land like a devouring storm. They conquered the Rephaim in Ashtaroth-Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Shavkiriathaim, tribes so ancient that even their names had begun to fade from men's tongues. Everywhere they went, blood flowed, altars burned, and the cries of captives rose to the heavens. By the time they reached the valley of Siddim, 5 kings of Canaan had gathered to stand against them: Bera, king of Sodom; Bersha, king of Gomorrah; Shernab, king of Admah; Shemeber, king of Zeboim; and the unnamed king of Bela, which was Zor. The battle that followed was not between equals. The valley became a furnace of smoke and death. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, falling into the tar pits that scarred the plain. The rest scattered. The eastern armies seized everything: gold, grain, cattle, women, children. And among the prisoners was a man named Lot, nephew of Abram. News traveled swiftly through the hills. One who escaped fled north and found Abram, dwelling by the oaks of Mamre. He told him everything: the war, the destruction, the capture of Lot. Abram's heart burned. He had no kingdom, no army, no throne. Yet he could not stand idle. Lot was family, blood-bound by promise. And Abram knew the God who called him from Ur was a God who delivered. That night, beneath the stars, Abram gathered his men. 318 servants, trained in secret, loyal unto death. They were shepherds, craftsmen, farmers, not warriors. Yet something divine stirred within them, a courage beyond reason. He divided them into companies and set out under the cover of darkness, following the trail of the invaders as they returned east with their captives. Days passed. The air grew colder as they climbed into the hill country north of Damascus. Finally, they found the enemy encamped near Dan. Tents stretched across the valley like a sea of shadows. Abram waited until night deepened. Then, with torches dimmed and heart steady, he gave the signal. They struck from every side, swift and silent. Confusion tore through the camp. Horses screamed. Soldiers stumbled from sleep. Blades clashed in panic. The eastern kings had never known such precision, such audacity. They thought they were being attacked by thousands. By dawn, the once mighty army of Kedorlaomer was in full retreat. Abram pursued them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus, and struck them again until their banners fell and their spoils were recovered. It was a miracle. A man with no army had defeated 4 kings whose power had stretched across nations. When the sun rose over the valley, Abram stood among the freed captives, tired, blood-stained, yet victorious. His men gathered the treasures and the people, among them Lot, shaken but alive. And then, silence. No drums, no shouts, only the whisper of wind over the hills. Abram lifted his eyes and saw him, a figure walking from the west, clothed in white linen, crowned not with gold but with grace. He bore no weapons, only a chalice and a loaf of bread. The men who saw him fell silent, for there was something otherworldly in his presence. As though the air itself bowed before him, he approached Abram with calm steps, and the battlefield felt suddenly sacred. This was Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God. He came not to conquer, but to bless. And in that moment, the dust of war met the peace of heaven. He lifted the bread and wine before Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." The words rang like thunder and yet fell like rain, soft, cleansing, divine. Abram bowed deeply. He knew this man, this priest, was no ordinary king. He sensed eternity in his voice, light in his eyes, and a holiness that pierced through the noise of battle. Without hesitation, Abram took 1/10 of all the spoils, gold, silver, and goods, and laid them at Melchizedek's feet. It was not tribute, it was recognition, a sign that the God whom Melchizedek served was the same God who had guided Abram's steps. At that moment, The covenant between heaven and earth drew closer. The priest of peace and the father of nations stood together. Two chosen vessels, two paths meeting at a divine intersection. Nearby, the king of Sodom arrived, breathless from escape. He offered Abram a bargain. "Take the goods for yourself, but give me the people." Abram refused. "I will not take even a thread or a sandal strap from you, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich. I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth.'" He took nothing for himself, only what his men had eaten. For Abram's victory was not of man's making. It was heaven's decree. Melchizedek watched in silence, a faint smile upon his lips. He saw in Abram something he had long awaited, faith unshaken, pure and absolute. And in that faith, the priest discerned a promise that would one day echo through eternity. When their meeting ended, Melchizedek turned and departed as quietly as he had come. No one saw which road he took. Some said he vanished among the trees. Others claimed he walked into the light and was gone. But Abram remembered, for in that brief encounter, the mystery of an eternal priesthood had been revealed. One that would stand long after kings had fallen and empires had turned to dust. That night, as Abram rested under the stars, he heard the voice of God once more. "Do not fear, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward." And Abram understood. The blessing of Melchizedek was not the end. It was the beginning. A promise had been sealed, not with war, but with bread and wine, with faith and peace. And somewhere beyond the hills, in the silent city of Salem, the King of Righteousness lifted his eyes to heaven and whispered, "It is done." The valley of battle had long grown silent. The smoke had faded, the swords lay buried in the dust, and the voices of men had turned again to the murmurs of peace. But the meeting between Abram and Melchizedek had left behind something unseen. An echo, a spiritual tremor that would travel through centuries. In the days that followed, Abram returned to his camp. He was a man changed. He had known victory before, but never a blessing like this. Melchizedek's words, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High," lingered in his spirit like sacred fire. He could not forget the bread, the wine, or the presence that surrounded that moment. It was as though heaven itself had bowed down upon the earth. But in Salem, the king-priest walked once more among his people, his heart heavy with divine revelation. He knew his role in this story was nearly complete, yet his order, his priesthood, would never end. For what happened between him and Abram was not just an act of blessing. It was a transfer of divine order, a covenant sealed not in ink, but in eternity. That night, Melchizedek climbed the hill outside Salem where his altar stood. He lifted his eyes toward the stars, and his voice rose like a psalm. The heavens were vast, but he spoke to one greater still. "O El Elyon," he said, "the Most High, whose throne is above all heavens, you have shown mercy to man. You have called one from among them, Abram, to carry your promise into the generations to come. Let your covenant be forever. Let your priesthood endure beyond my days." The wind moved softly, carrying his words into the night. And it was in that quiet moment that the mystery of Melchizedek unfolded, the revelation of a priesthood unlike any other that had ever been or would ever be. Unlike the priests of the world, Melchizedek's calling did not come from men. No prophet anointed him. No law established his role. He was a priest by divine appointment, chosen directly by God to stand as a bridge between heaven and earth. Where the priests of the future would offer sacrifices for sin, Melchizedek offered bread and wine, symbols of peace, not blood. Where others would plead for mercy, he declared blessing. His was not a priesthood of sorrow, but of righteousness and reconciliation. And though he was a king, his throne was not made of gold. It was the altar itself, the place where heaven's light kissed the earth. In the silence of the night, Melchizedek understood what no other man yet knew, that this priesthood would outlive him. It would reappear, not in the line of his blood, but in the line of his spirit, in one who was yet to come. That one would not wear a crown of gold, but of thorns. He would not rule from a palace, but from a cross, and he would offer not bread and wine as symbols, but his very body and blood as fulfillment. Centuries would pass before mankind would see this mystery revealed. But in that ancient moment on the hill, Melchizedek saw the vision clearly, a glimpse of the eternal priest who would one day walk the earth as God in flesh. He closed his eyes and wept softly, for he knew that what he represented was not his own greatness, but the eternal mercy of God. The Most High had chosen him to bear a shadow of the truth that would redeem all creation. In Salem, life went on as always. The fields blossomed, children laughed, and the songs of worship rose every morning. But unseen to men, a divine current was moving. A seed had been planted. The blessing given to Abram had taken root, and through it, the promise of salvation had begun to breathe. Many years later, when Abram's descendants would become a nation, they would build a tabernacle and an altar. Priests from the tribe of Levi would serve day and night, offering lambs and bulls to atone for sin. But those sacrifices, though commanded, were temporary shadows of a greater reality. They pointed back to something older, purer, the priesthood of Melchizedek. A priesthood not limited by lineage. A priesthood not born of flesh, but of spirit. A priesthood that would stand forever. The scrolls of time turned, and long after Melchizedek was gone from the earth, his name remained like a whisper on the wind. Prophets would speak of him. Kings would wonder about him. And then, in the days of David, the echo would return once more. David, the shepherd king of Israel, stood on his own hill overlooking Jerusalem, the city once called Salem. He lifted his harp and sang under the inspiration of the Spirit. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. Those words were not about David. They were prophecy. David saw beyond his own time, glimpsing the same eternal priest that Melchizedek had foreseen, the one who would unite kingship and priesthood perfectly in himself. And that prophecy would remain unfulfilled for 1,000 years, until the day when heaven itself came down in the form of a man. When Jesus of Nazareth lifted the bread and the cup and said, "This is my body, this is my blood," the shadow became substance. The mystery was revealed. The order of Melchizedek had never died. It had simply waited. In that moment, the eternal priesthood took flesh. The same blessing that Melchizedek spoke over Abram was now spoken over all mankind, not with bread and wine upon an altar of stone, but upon the altar of a cross. And though Melchizedek's name appears only briefly in the ancient record, his presence is eternal. He was the beginning of a divine order, one that exists beyond time, beyond nation, beyond human understanding. The priests of Levi were many, for death prevented them from continuing. But the priesthood of Melchizedek stands as one, eternal, unbroken. Its power is not in bloodlines, but in righteousness. Its offering is not sacrifice, but salvation. Back in that ancient age, when the stars shone over Salem and the earth was still young, Melchizedek stood at his altar one final time. He lifted his hands, and his voice trembled with the weight of revelation. "O Most High," he prayed, "you have shown me the pattern of eternity. I have seen the shadow of the one who is to come. Let my priesthood rest in his, and let peace reign forever upon your people." As dawn broke over the city, the King of Peace descended from his altar and vanished from history. No tomb was ever found, no record of his death ever written. And yet, his order lives, not as a memory, but as a living covenant. Because what began with a loaf of bread and a cup of wine in the hands of a man named Melchizedek became the eternal bridge between man and God, the order of righteousness that never ends. After the meeting with Abram, Melchizedek returned to Salem. But something had changed. He moved through his city as before, blessing, teaching, praying, yet his spirit seemed to walk in two worlds at once. He had fulfilled his purpose, but his eyes now looked beyond the visible. The people still revered him. They brought their first fruits, they sought his counsel, and they called him the Light of Salem. But those closest to him began to notice a quiet withdrawal, a soft fading, as though the king was slowly being lifted away from the earth itself. At sunrise, he would ascend the hill of offering, just as he always had. There, he would raise his hands toward heaven, the wind swirling around him, the flames of the altar flickering with a strange brilliance. And those who watched from afar whispered that the air seemed to shimmer when he prayed, that the light itself bowed before him. Then, one morning, Melchizedek climbed the hill and never returned. His servants searched for days, then weeks. They found his staff lying beside the altar, his linen robe folded neatly upon the stone. But of the man himself, there was no trace, no body, no tomb, no sign of death. It was as if the earth refused to hold him. The people mourned, but there was peace in their mourning. For they knew their king had not vanished into the grave, but into glory. And so Salem continued, carrying his teachings and his ways. The altar of bread and wine remained, tended by priests who had served under him. They told their children and their children's children of the man who ruled with righteousness and spoke face to face with God. But as generations passed, the memory of Melchizedek began to fade into legend. The world changed, nations rose, idols multiplied, and the truth he carried was buried beneath centuries of noise and conquest. Yet, even buried truth still breathes. Far away, in the deserts where Abram's descendants would one day wander, the promise given through Melchizedek's blessing began to take shape. A people chosen by God, a covenant sealed in blood, and a law that would point them back to the holiness once known in Salem. But the priesthood that rose among them, the Levitical order, was different. It was built on lineage, bound to the blood of men. Its priests lived and died, and their offerings were never enough to erase sin completely. They could only cover, not cleanse. The priests of Levi were servants of law, but Melchizedek had been the servant of grace. For a time, the people forgot that another priesthood had existed before the law, one that was eternal, unbroken, divine. Until one night in the palace of Jerusalem, the very city once called Salem, a king remembered. David, the shepherd warrior who became Israel's greatest ruler, often sat beneath the stars with his harp, singing of things far beyond his understanding. And one night, inspiration fell upon him like fire. He lifted his eyes toward the heavens and declared words that would echo through eternity. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. David saw something beyond his time, a prophecy of a coming king who would not only rule Israel, but reign over creation. A king who would combine the crown of authority with the robe of priesthood, uniting heaven and earth once more. In those few words, the forgotten priest was remembered. The mystery stirred again. Melchizedek's shadow returned, rising from the dust of forgotten ages to prepare the world for something eternal. Centuries later, when prophets spoke of a Messiah, their words carried the weight of that same order. Isaiah spoke of a child born who would be called Prince of Peace. Jeremiah spoke of a righteous branch from David's line who would reign with justice. Zechariah saw a vision of a priest seated upon a throne, king and priest united as one. The order of Melchizedek was awakening again, not through men's rituals, but through prophecy, shaping the destiny of nations. Then came silence. For 400 years, heaven did not speak. No prophet, no vision, no voice from the sky. Until the day a baby's cry pierced the stillness of Bethlehem. He was born in a manger, wrapped not in silk but in humility. And though the world did not know it, the eternal priesthood had returned, hidden in human form. As Jesus of Nazareth grew, so too did the mystery. He healed the sick, opened blind eyes, forgave sins. But it was not until the night before his death that the connection became clear. At a table with his disciples, he took bread and wine, lifted them in his hands, just as Melchizedek had done, and said, "This is my body, which is given for you. This cup is the new covenant in my blood." The shadow of Salem met its fulfillment in that upper room. The first priest's symbols became the final Savior's reality. The order of Melchizedek was complete, eternal, divine, and unstoppable. And when Christ offered himself upon the cross, the temple veil was torn, and the priesthood of men ended. For the eternal priest had entered the most holy place, not made with hands, but in heaven itself. After his resurrection, the apostles understood. In the book of Hebrews, the mystery was finally written clearly. This Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, is without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abides a priest forever. It was never about a man alone. Melchizedek was a revelation, a window through which God showed humanity what eternal priesthood truly means. His story was the outline. Christ was the completion. And yet, the name Melchizedek still carries a weight of wonder. Was he a man, an angel, or the pre-incarnate Christ, appearing in ancient days to set the stage for redemption? No scroll has answered it. No scholar can fully explain it. But maybe that is the beauty of his story, that it was never meant to be solved, only understood through faith. For faith sees what history cannot. It sees the hand of God weaving threads of mystery into the fabric of time, until, at last, light emerges. And so, Melchizedek lives on, not in the pages of history, but in the hearts of those who seek righteousness and peace. He is the symbol of what it means to walk in divine order, unshaken by time, unseen yet eternal. From the dawn of Salem to the covenant with Abraham, from the Psalms of David to the cross of Christ, his name flows like a river through the story of salvation. He was the king who ruled without armies, the priest who served without temple walls, the man who appeared once and changed everything. Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, the priest of the Most High, remains the silent witness of God's eternal plan. And though the world may forget, heaven never will.